Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Teague, Toyota Jeff. I'm your Toyota resource, but I'm not the only Toyota resource here in the room because I am honored to have collab time. We've got AMD from the Car Care Nut. This channel is skyrocketing. You won't even believe what a resource he can be as far as the world of Toyota, maintenance, hybrids, servicing. AMD, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi Jeff, how you doing? Thank you so much for
great,
having
man.
me. I really appreciate it.
That's really cool. So before we get into the nuts and bolts, which is why people are here, let's find out what makes you a resource. Can you tell us a little bit about what's your background with Toyotas, with vehicles themselves, and with hybrids?
All right. Jeff, I am currently a Toyota Master Diagnostic Technician. I have over a decade of experience. I've been working at a Toyota dealership all this time, from small stuff to big stuff. It's been quite a journey. I started this channel to help people, just to bridge the gap between DIY mechanics, owners, and then professional mechanics. As you know, you work at a dealership as well. When you walk in the service drive of a dealership or service department, you don't really get to interact with the mechanics. You usually get service advisors, managers, porters, everybody, but you never really have that interaction with the mechanic directly. So
Right.
I started this channel to kind of bridge that gap, and people can get direct expert advice, and we can talk, and I just want to help people, and I think if I do my small token of contribution to the world will be a better place.
I love that philosophy. I love it because a lot of times you don't see the person, like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
You're the person who really controls how a vehicle is serviced and repaired and how well it lasts over the long term. And people will want to know this. You started your channel just, I believe, a year and a half ago, where you really started getting things going. You now have just under 200,000 subscribers, which is a number I am salivating over. I'm like one of Pavlov's dogs here. I love that. And it grows about 500 to 600 people per day. People love you, AMD.
I'm absolutely honored and baffled by the number of people that watch the channel. But my biggest take from it is I don't only look at numbers, I look at what value I am giving my viewers, and it is an absolute honor that I am potentially helping this many people, and I will continue to do so as long as God allows me to do it.
That sounds fantastic. I appreciate it. Well, let's jump into this. I'd like to talk about hybrids today, but a lot of my viewers want to know about Toyota hybrids, both pre-owned, first generation, starting with the Prius, all the way up to all these hybrids and electric vehicles and primes that are coming out right now. Toyota, I remember them telling me about 2 years ago, they said by the year 2025, we want to have 25% of all Toyotas manufactured be some form of electrification, whether it be hybrid or prime or hydrogen fuel cell, anything like that. Now they've bumped that up. By 2030, they want 70% of all Toyotas to be electrified. It's already at 25% now. So what is your experience with hybrids?
I was very young back when the first generation Prius came out, but there was a point where people started laughing at this, and then we fast forward when Tesla came out, and people don't realize that actually what made electrification, if we want to call it that today, possible or more acceptable is actually the Prius. As much as people make fun of the Prius, it is actually a stepping stone for everything that we have today. And unfortunately right now it's a little struggling because of the hybrids going into everything else, and people wanting more normal cars that are actually hybrid, more normal cars that are electric. And from the service side, I think the success of hybrids and plug-in hybrids, and now we're going to have electric cars on the Toyota side at least pretty soon, the success is their reliability. I mean, if you start looking into the complication of hybrids and how complicated they are, and when you understand how they work, it's like, oh my God, this is like a spaceship. But yet people never really get to find out how much does this spaceship cost to fix, because they just don't break down. And knowing how Toyota does things, any really big problems that will be deal breakers, they tend to just say, you know what, we're going to enforce this image of reliability, we're going to take care of our people. Here is a campaign, here's a recall, here's something that they wouldn't pass the burden of small issues on to people. Yes, hybrids eventually will have issues, namely the hybrid battery and all that stuff, but overall, it's really not as, when you compare it to a non-hybrid car, it is actually a lower cost of ownership. You don't have an alternator, you don't have a starter, you don't have the newer one, there's no drive belt. Overall, the efficiency is so high. Some people question, well, is this efficiency going to be offset by the price of the battery when we're replacing it at some point? It actually doesn't, because gasoline cars, when they get old, if the transmission goes, well, there goes your hybrid battery. It's really the same thing in the end, but you have all this ultra efficient car that you've been driving all these years, saving all that money on gas, and that's really what pivoted the hybrids into becoming mainstream.
Right. And speaking of that, a lot of people want to know, let's say people have been driving a Prius for 20 years. They know what type of maintenance is due. But for other people who haven't taken that leap of hybrid faith yet, they don't even know what they're getting themselves into. And I hear a lot of questions from prospective and new hybrid owners. What kind of maintenance is different? How is that different from a gasoline engine? And I thought you might have some insight into that.
So the main thing about hybrids is there is still a gasoline engine that requires basically the same maintenance, oil changes, spark plugs, coolant replacement, and all that good stuff. But in addition to that, you have the transmission, which the world is spread on that, whether we want to go the lifetime or not. The transmission is very simple to service on hybrids. Just replace the fluid and that's it. No special procedure or special tools. It's actually very rudimentary and old school. But the added maintenance is you have a second coolant system for the hybrid system. And that's really something simple, inexpensive to really service. You service it alongside the coolant for the engine. And then the other added maintenance is, this is something that I am really hoping to bring awareness to, the hybrid fan filter. The battery has a fan that cools the battery. It is essential that this fan operates at optimum performance. So initially, Toyota this was kind of an afterthought, something that was missed. This fan gets dirty, gets clogged, and now you have no cooling for the battery and they overheat, and that's really what caused them to fail all the time. But that's one maintenance that lately we've been adding filters to them. We're trying to bring awareness to them. So that's another maintenance. But again, we're talking about a tiny little filter. We're not talking about a multi-hundred or multi-thousand-dollar repair. We're talking about a tiny little filter. Anybody can replace. They're not really hard to do. But other than that, there is, I call it the negative maintenance, stuff that you never have to do to hybrids, which people don't really consider. You don't have an alternator, you don't have a starter, you don't have a drive belt in most of them, especially the newer ones. And the hybrid system itself, it doesn't really have any other maintenance. It's just, it's there. See you at 300,000 miles, if that.
That is absolutely incredible. That's amazing. And another thing, talking about longevity, one of the main questions I get, and I don't even know if there is a specific answer, like the answer is X or the answer is Y. Generically speaking, how long would you say a hybrid battery might last?
I would say we have come a long way from the days of the past. In the past, I would put it, you should see 150 to 200,000 miles. That would be a realistic expectation. And 10 years was a realistic expectation. Maybe you can get it to 15 years. But lately, I'll speak from the shop here, from what I see. The second generation Prius, even the third generation Prius, the second generation Prius, we've seen an alarming number of battery replacements at some point when they were what I would call in service. At the dealership, when the car gets to between 10 and 15 years old, they tend to fall off the dealership. People, second owner, third owner buys them. They don't want to spend that big money at the dealership, so they tend to disappear from the dealership. But when they were active, I have seen an alarming number of batteries on the second generation Prius, mainly for lack of maintenance. Usually the fan is clogged, there's no filter. Third generation Prius, things got better, but we had other issues with the third generation Prius. Within a few years of it coming out, in Prius or the fourth generation hybrid system, not just the Prius. Things have gotten extreme in reliability, and just to where I would comfortably say, if you take care of this car and you're aware of this fan filter, you're aware what is the things that would reduce your reliability, especially for the hybrid battery, which is something that people worry about, you can easily expect to see 250,000 miles, perhaps 15 years out of these batteries with good maintenance. That is a very realistic expectation. And the thing about it is, and people are like, well, these batteries are very expensive. I also go back and say this, a normal gasoline car, if you go 250,000 miles, 15 years old, the transmission goes, nobody really will get upset at that. Well, that's a lot of miles and that's a long time of age. So it really is the same. But I've seen, and this is where the X that you talked about is really unknown. You can't put a number, but this is an expectation that you can expect and be realistic about it. I have seen hybrid batteries last well over 300,000 miles. I have seen hybrid batteries fail at 50,000 miles. It really depends on it all ultimately depends not on the build quality, it depends on the operating conditions of this battery. Taxis usually have a very heavy duty use, and we still see those, but they still get over 300,000 miles out of them on the original battery, original engine, original everything, and they're still going. They just retire them, and that's that.
Right. And now you had talked about, I guess, replacing an entire battery. Do you have a general, and I know you don't handle the pricing part of it because you might not be on that part of the front end of service, but do you have a ballpark of what a hybrid battery, let's say like a Prius battery or a RAV4 traction battery might cost to replace? Or is that hard to tell?
I will categorize it as this. I can't put an exact price because the prices will vary with times and all that, but the smaller the car, the cheaper the battery. The bigger the car, the more expensive the battery, simply because something like a Prius will have a smaller battery than a RAV4, than a Highlander, than a Sienna, for example. Now we have the Sienna Hybrid. But overall, the overall average, dealership-wise, we're talking anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500 seems to be the range. Some of them will go a little bit higher than the range. Some of them will actually drop below the range. It really depends, but I remember 3 years into the third generation Prius, again we go back to this, I've already replaced the battery. I have not replaced a single battery on the fourth generation hybrid system, and trust me, we see a lot of high mileage examples. They've gotten to a point where they're just that reliable. They've got this down where we can make a battery that actually lasts a very long time. That got a lot better with third generation Prius and third generation hybrids. I still see a few like 2012 to 2017, that generation Camry hybrid. I still see a few battery replacements there. These tend to be a little bit more of the expensive ones. These are the $3,000, $3,500 range, but still high mileage cars, neglected, of course. The main thing is the battery fan usually clogged completely, but really don't see much on the newer stuff. We recently had a a Prius Prime with 225,000 miles. It's 2017, and this is a plug-in hybrid. That battery, if it goes, it's extremely expensive.
Crazy driving.
Yes, and it's fine. And I actually went out of my way to talk to the owner. I'm like, hey, how is your 25-mile range charge? He says, it dropped a little bit, but we're still getting 20, 21 miles on the charge. So that's actually pretty impressive. That's a pretty big battery, and that's a lot of miles.
I appreciate that. I'm learning so much. I really appreciate it. Now, is there ever a time where people can just repair a portion of the battery as opposed to replacing the entire thing, where that makes sense, either the life of what they're going to be repairing for the next several years or just cost?
So honestly, this has come up a lot, and yes, you can't. The hybrid battery is comprised of many different cells. Just think of it as AAA batteries lined up. That's a simple way to put it. You can replace the individual cells, but here's the concern. If you're doing this yourself, first you need to be aware of the dangers of the high voltage. If you are aware of those and you're trained, I'm not going to suggest anybody go and does this themselves. But if you are doing this yourself, it's worth the experiment. But it comes a point where, is this even worth it? So let's say you replace a cell. Let's say hypothetically a battery has 20 cells. Well, each cell is, let's say, $100. So if you replace the 20 cells, now you're looking at $2,000. But if one cell goes and you replace it, and then 2 weeks later, another one goes and now you replace it. And now we're playing this, if you factor in your time in taking this battery apart, doing these repairs, at some point, you just turned a reliable car into unreliable because it keeps failing and failing and failing. That is one factor. The other factor is if you replace one of the 20 cells, well, guess what? The rest of the cells are the same age as this one that you replaced. So what guarantees you that you're not going to be replacing one after another and it just becomes counterproductive? To me, when your battery fails, you have to make a choice. How committed are you to this car? If this car otherwise is in great shape and you've taken care of it and the battery fails, I would there make a decision. Are you going to make the investment, replace the battery, and be done with it? Because usually when you replace a battery, let's say this car has 250,000 miles, you have 10, 15 years old car, then is the decision. If you replace this battery with an original battery that has been completely redone, everything is new, you can easily expect it to last the same amount of time of the battery you are replacing right now. That's a simple, logical thought. So at that point, you want to make a decision. Am I going to start gluing and piecing things together just to get me buy another 3-4 months? Or am I going to make a permanent repair? But if you're paying someone, and this is where it becomes a problem, and I want people to know why we don't do this at a dealership level. If you go to a dealership and they replaced one cell, well, let's say you paid 2 hours in labor. Average labor charge is $150 in Chicago. I don't know how it is in your side. You paid $300 plus $100, $150 for the cell itself. That's a small fortune. Now you're talking a quarter price of a new battery. Well, what happens when when another cell fails after a month? If you were the consumer, you would come to the dealership yelling, screaming, upset, and I'm with you. I understand you just spent $450. But how do we explain this to the consumer? Hey, you have 20 cells, you replace this one, now this one failed. You can't do that. And people come to the dealership, they expect excellence, where we replace this battery, see you in 15 years. So that's why dealerships really don't go into the single cell replacements.
One thing I really like about your style and your approach to this is, I was watching one of your videos and you said, my job is simple but complicated. I want to take something complicated and make it simple so that it's easy to understand. And I just really appreciate your approach. I'm hoping that you can do the same thing when we're talking about lithium ion versus nickel-metal hydride batteries. We have a lot of, I call them Monday morning armchair quarterbacks, where they're like, I can't believe this car is putting in a nickel-metal hydride. That's old stuff. Why aren't they using lithium ion? Like, maybe your engineering background is coming in when you're saying that, but I know people, they want what's new and best and shiny and new and what will be the best for them and their family. But how do you tell people that Toyota knows what they're talking about, or any company, when they choose one battery over the next? I'm sure some have advantages, especially for each individual model that they put those batteries in.
So my general recommendation for people, and I've said this in a video actually, I don't think a nickel-metal hydride or lithium-ion battery should be a deciding factor when you buy a car, because sometimes they will put that lithium-ion battery in a car not because it's better, but because it's lighter. Sometimes they'll put the nickel-metal hydride battery because they needed that heavier weight. I mean, there's a lot of factors in this, and it shouldn't be a deciding factor when you're buying the car. The truth is, nickel-metal hydride batteries have been around for a long time, and in Toyota hybrids, they have the track records. When I say, okay, I've seen this battery last 15 years, that's a good realistic expectation, 250,000 miles to 300,000 miles, that is a realistic expectation. I say that because I've seen it. But when you ask me about lithium-ion batteries, I will just tell you, I hope they are the same. This is where I'm only trusting Toyota's track record of good decisions and reliability. But honestly, there is no track record of them because they haven't just been that long out. So I can't, with good conscience, come out and tell you, oh yeah, they're going to last 15, 20. I have no idea. But time will tell. I don't think it should be a deciding factor when you go buy a car, lithium ion versus look at the final product. I will give you an example that will make it very simpler. For folks who say, I must buy a car that has lithium ion battery, I don't want the nickel metal, or vice versa. You know, there was a time when cars were very simple, they had a timing belt, the engines were very quiet. All of a sudden we started switching to timing chains and engines got a little louder. People were upset, oh my God, these chains will fail and they will explode and life will end. And thanks to BMW, that did happen, but not Toyota. But you know what? Fast forward now, people don't want a timing belt. Because once they're presented with a bill to replace a timing belt, they don't like it. So new things are not always bad. There are so many things that people objected to, but then as time passed, they realized, wait a second, this is irrelevant fluff. We just wasted our breath for nothing because nothing happened. Same thing with this. I don't think nickel-metal hydride batteries are bad. They have their advantages, they have their disadvantages. And then same thing with lithium-ion batteries. It's not all rainbows and butterflies with lithium-ion batteries. They have their disadvantages where they're worse than nickel-metal hydride. I think the biggest advantage of lithium ions, and this is possibly why the reason they're using them more and more, is their weight, their size and their weight. They can deliver the same or better amount of power for a much smaller size. And that's really the biggest thing.
That is really interesting. I hear that all the time, and you probably do as well. So it's nice to kind of, I guess, make it crystal clear as we can. One of the questions that people have from time to time with me is they want to know, what do I recommend for a hybrid vehicle, whether they're, I guess we can all say we assume that a new vehicle is going to be reliable if it's a Toyota hybrid. What about a pre-owned one, whether it's the very first generation or the middle generations? What would you recommend to somebody who's maybe looking for just a reliable vehicle that's not going to break the bank and that's going to last a long time? What has a good track record? What's the Car Care Nuts recommendation on hybrids?
So I think more important than what car you're going to buy is what are your expectations are of this car. The biggest thing with car buying, at least in my opinion, is expectations. If your expectations are unrealistic, no matter how good the car is, you're going to be disappointed. But with hybrids, generally, when you buy a hybrid that is less than 10 years old, has less than 100,000 miles, or right around 100,000 miles, your expectation should be 5 to 7 years, potentially, of no issues. But when you go buy a hybrid, you need to really look at the car, look at the maintenance. You need to buy a good example. Hybrids can be great, but neglect them and they can turn into a nightmare. That's really very easily, because I see people neglect the maintenance. I've seen people not understand, wait a second, I have to do oil changes on this car? I thought it was electric. No, it's a hybrid, it's not electric. Believe it or not, there are people out there who are just not interested in cars. They don't know, they just want to start the car and go. Yeah. And I understand, that's me and you, we know about cars, not everybody is, and that's okay. But that's what we're trying to change with these videos. But the importance of buying a good car to begin with. Was this car maintained? Was this car cared for? Who fixed this car? What kind of parts did they use? And then mainly, did the owner of this car understand that this was a hybrid? Did they maintain that fan? Did they take care of the hybrid side maintenance? That really plays a big factor in how is this car going to perform when you buy it used. Generally, if you want to play it safe, the 5 to 10 year old hybrids are possibly the best deal to buy. Less than 5 years old, they tend to be a little bit on the expensive side. Not always, but that's when they're really hot and everybody wants them. But when you get into the 5 to 10 year old mark, that's when you're going to find them at decent prices and you can still have a decent amount of life left in them. Granted, the maintenance is taken care of. There are some odd exceptions here and there. Please avoid the very old ones because they're simply just too old. You go buy a 2005 Prius, don't expect it to last 10 years, 100,000 miles without anything. That's just not a realistic expectation. Same thing with, say, a 2007 Highlander hybrid. If you go buy a 2007 Highlander non-hybrid, that's an excellent car that you could actually, if you buy a good one, it could last another 10 years, 100,000 miles. But the hybrid one, it could also last as a car as a whole, but the battery might fail. This is again, why do hybrids get to a point where their prices drop significantly? Because everybody's afraid of the battery. And it's going to fail at some point. It's not the end of the world, but you just got to calculate that into your expectations.
Okay, that makes total sense. And I think that's one thing that people really need to focus in on is how was this vehicle maintained? It's just like when you buy anything, like, is it gently used? Was it somebody who really cared about the vehicle, or was it somebody who just drove it like they stole it, you know? And that has a huge impact on it. Another vehicle that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm not sure, it's so new, I don't know if you have much insight on this one yet that you can share at least. I know you have technical information that maybe is not shareable yet. The Tundra Hybrid, I'm fascinated with that iForce Max. Is there anything at all you want to tell viewers about what they can expect or what your thoughts are on this, since it's so new, coming to Tundra finally?
The internal discussion was when the the first picture was not even released, we started having this conversation because the last hybrid that was a rear-wheel drive, that setup, not transverse, was the LS600H. So our guess was that we're gonna see a giant ECVT transmission. But then the biggest weakness of ECVTs was towing. They just could not they did not handle high torque very well. And that was a problem with the LS600, that was a problem with the GS450H, and when we go on the Lexus side. So that had to be a factor when they went to do a hybrid in the Tundra. And I think the design they came up with is brilliant because you kind of have the best of two worlds. You still have a tough 10-speed transmission that could handle a lot of towing. But one thing that they did, most cars guzzle the most gasoline, even the smallest car, is that in that moment where they take off from a dead stop. So they put that motor, that takes care of your takeoff, and now you're not guzzling as much gas to get this behemoth to start rolling. So that was actually a brilliant design. I don't or cannot share a lot of information about it yet, but I think that's an interesting new design that you could actually see trickle down the line to other models. I really like that design.
That's cool. I know I'm excited to see it. I'll be hopefully able to drive it real soon again. I cannot wait. I think that does it for me. I've checked off everything that I really wanted to ask you because I know you're such a resource and I appreciate your time today. I would encourage everybody, please go and subscribe to the Car Care Nut. Let's see if we can get him to 200,000 just from our followers alone. That would be fantastic. So AMD, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. No problem at all. And I want to be on your channel. I want to give people advice on how to buy cars. Can I do that?
Let's do it, Jeff. Come on over.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody again. See you later, AMD. See you later,
See you later.
world. Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.